From the front porch of the Berger residence here in Wellington, Ohio, welcome to another episode of Dialogue with the Dukes. This is the last episode of the 2019-2020 school year. As always, the program is being brought to you by the Patricia Lindley Center for the Performing Arts and also by the Wellington Music in downtown Wellington. This morning, because this is the last Dialogue with the Dukes, we're inviting back one of our most popular interviewees, Mrs. Tina Drake, the principal of Wellington High School. Welcome, Tina.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing fine, and I hope you are also keeping healthy and happy, I hope.
Yep, for sure.
We want to divide this episode into three parts. What happened before all of this happened, all of the bad stuff happened on March 13th, then talk about what has happened since March 13th, and then looking into the future. So the first thing we want to talk about is what was actually going on at the beginning of this school year. And I know that we got two grants. What were they used for, and what were they accomplishing?
Well, we had two grants here at the high school. One was the Quality Improvement Grant, and that focused on just the overall quality of the school environment at the high school. So we partnered with the Northeast Ohio Diversity Center, and all of our staff was being trained. And then I also had all the freshmen going through diversity training about every other month. That was going well. I think it was well received the more we got into the program. But again, that got cut short due to the closure. The Quality Improvement Grant also allowed for my math, English, and science departments to go through NIMSI training, which is the National Math and Science Initiative. And that initiative just gave my teachers more ideas and how to integrate more ownership in student learning and student engagement within the classroom. We also used it for purchasing graphing calculators for our math department, and then our math department did receive some Texas Instrument training as well. And then we also used the grant money for college visits. We were able to send all of our seniors on a college visit in the fall. We had college visits scheduled for the spring for our freshman, sophomore, and junior level kids right at the end of May, but we weren't able to do that. So we will be doing those college visits in the fall because that money will carry over into the first few months of next school year. The state's carrying the funds over. We also received the Expanding Opportunities Grant for each child, and we were using this to focus on our Prepared for Success measure on our report card. And so we were focusing on our AP and pre-AP program with the College Board. So we were able to provide Chromebook carts for all AP and pre-AP teachers' classrooms that did not already have them, because a lot of our textbooks and a lot of our resources are online. We also purchased the Albert program for all of our AP classes. That was just an additional resource to support our AP curriculums, which went very well. Our English departments also had Grammarly, which is an editing software and writing software for our kids. And then we also were able to provide college tours for all of our AP students. Those were planned, but unfortunately we weren't able to finish off on those. Both grants also provide professional development. So last summer, we went, me and some of my AP teachers went to AP training over the summer, and then that was ongoing throughout the school year. And then we had additional AP training coming up this summer. And then we also had some springboard training with the College Board, just as a review refresher for my English and math departments. Those I'm hoping will either be held in the fall or they'll be held online. So our grant money was being put to good use, and it'll continue to be used next school year.
Well, I'm glad you talked about the AP programs, and I understand that you actually expanded them. How were the results? Did they turn out well?
Well, that's a good question. So since the schools were closed, all AP exams were done online, and we should be getting those results back this summer, the end of June, beginning of July. So it'll be interesting to see how our kids did on those AP courses. But all in all, we gave probably about 130 AP exams this year. to all of our kids. We had 8 classes. All of our core content area had AP courses in them. Next year, we will be expanding to an AP Computer Science and an AP Prob and Stat. So next year, we'll have 10 AP courses, and then our pre-AP program will also be part of our sophomore level core classes as well.
Including the AP programs, I know that you also started an intervention study program and supporting the students who might have been a little bit behind. Explain how that worked out for them.
So we started a support intervention study hall for our kids that were at risk for graduating. So those were the kids who were behind in credits or just weren't being successful in their classes. So this intervention support study hall, I had 2 staff members, whether it be a teacher and a parapro or 2 parapros overseeing these intervention supports. And so the kids that were assigned to those courses or those sections were the kids that were working on credit recovery to get back on track for graduation. Also the kids that from previous test scores or previous grades needed extra support with getting homework done, getting homework turned in, studying for tests. And so it was just an extra layer, more of a tier 2 layer of support for those kids that needed a little bit more push to get caught up on credits or to make sure they're getting homework done. It actually was extremely successful. Many of our kids that we flagged at the beginning of the year were successful and they passed all their classes. All of our seniors that were in danger of not graduating, they are all graduating. So it was extremely successful, and next year I hope to expand on that idea even more just to keep our kids engaged and on the right track for graduation.
We've been talking with Mrs. Tina Drake, the principal of Wellington High School. We talked about everything that was taking place during the fall and halfway into the winter quarter before that fateful day, March 13th, happened when everything shut down. So Mrs. Drake, explain the reaction of both the students and the teachers on March 13th.
Well, it was really surreal. I think we still didn't quite believe that it was happening. So about a week before that, when we kind of anticipated school being closed down, I contacted my teachers that Sunday and into Monday and said, everybody needs to get a Google Classroom set up. We need to be prepared and ready for if and when we are shut down. Now, a good handful of my teachers already were using Google Classroom, so it was a matter of everybody else getting on to Google Classroom. So that Thursday, we had a teachers meeting and we met in the computer lab, and everybody kind of finished setting up their Google Classrooms. Teachers were helping teachers who weren't familiar with Google Classroom on what to do and how to do it. So it was very stressful for some of the teachers who aren't necessarily technology driven, but they all did it. And so then that Friday, I think we still were in disbelief that we had to plan for everything that we were, but my teachers did a fantastic job with each one of their classes, making sure that every student who was in the building got signed up for their Google Classroom. They did a rundown of the expectations going into the beginning of the closure on what they wanted for assignments and how things were going to be working and how to communicate and contact them. Again, none of us had ever been trained on how to do online teaching and online learning. So we were literally learning as we went. By the end of the day, I think everybody, teachers and students, we were all just kind of numb to the idea that we might not be coming back. I had my students clean out their lockers as if it was the end of the year because I wanted my custodial staff to do a deep clean and sanitize everything.
Right.
So it really felt like it was the end of the school year. Mm-hmm. And lunches were really quiet. The biggest conversation and the biggest fear was not knowing what was going to happen. Right. We had to get Chromebooks assigned to kids that needed Chromebooks. But all in all, I think the transition for the high school went as smoothly as it possibly could. Like I said, my teaching staff is absolutely fantastic, and they did everything they needed to do. the kids and the families, I really think, handled it as well as they could, because it was new to everybody. Nobody signed up to do online schooling, and I think the first couple weeks went better than anticipated. And then we hit spring break. And then after spring break, our participation kind of fell and dropped off. But along the way, the teachers adjusted as they needed to adjust, and to make sure that the kids were as successful as they possibly could be. And then when the final call came to where school was canceled for the rest of the year, I think the seniors really took that hard. And the seniors really struggled those last few weeks, but they did power through and they did accomplish what they needed to accomplish. So it was hard, but there really wasn't a whole lot we could do. I mean, this was completely out of our control, and we had to do what we were told to do and what we were expected to do.
Of course. Well, you mentioned how the teachers, a few of them at least, had never done online teaching before. Was there any opposition to that from the teachers? And as a second corollary question, was there any opposition from the students and going into, not being in school anymore and having to do this online schooling?
No, there really wasn't. I think from the teacher's perspective, we did what we knew we needed to do for the kids. And we did everything we did it because we felt that was in the best choice and the best action for our kids. And I think kind of the same for the parents and the students. I mean, we had to do it. It wasn't as if it was an option. And I think not knowing some of the issues and challenges families were having at home, I really don't feel we had a whole lot of opposition when it came to the instructional part of the online and the academic piece of the online, because we had to do it. But I do believe that the teachers and my staff accommodated as much as what they possibly could. And we accommodated with the issues that we were aware of that was going on at home. We tried to show a lot of grace and mercy when it came to our grading and the assignments that were expected from the kids.
Well, you talked about whether where you had to do what you had to do, so to speak. So I guess my final question in this segment would be, was the experiment successful?
Well, I wouldn't call it an experiment because it was reality. And I guess it would depend on what we're going to measure as success. Did we finish the year off? Yeah, we finished the year off. So that was a success. Did we do it to the best of our ability? I do believe we did it to our best of our ability, teachers and students and families. I think we all pulled through the best we possibly could. I think it was as successful as it possibly could have been. Talking to other administrators in other districts, especially larger districts, I think we benefited because of our size and because of the relationships that we have with our students and our families. I think that made it successful.
What do you actually expect, Mrs. Drake, as far as planning for options and what scenarios that might be involved, and how are you actually planning for that when and if school actually starts again? Well, school will start, but what form it starts, that's the question, isn't it, Mrs. Drake?
I don't know what's going to happen. I know that we want to be prepared for as many options as we possibly can. One option is we come back to school like normal and we just continue on in a normal school setting. Realistically, I'm not sure if that's necessarily going to be the case. So we've been tossing around some different ideas with my leadership team, and I do want to get a separate team created with teachers and my guidance counselor and some parents to start discussing more options once we get a little bit more guidance from the health department, the Department of Education, and the CDC. But we're kind of looking at different ideas on what it would look like if, maybe we had a grade come in a day, or we did haze for different grades throughout the week. you mentioned the cafeteria. Not really sure how the cafeteria would look because I know by then we're still going to have to maintain that social distancing, which means the lunches would have to be a lot smaller. Classrooms, we'd have to have smaller class sizes because we'd have to maintain social distancing. I've already thought out, when we're in the hallways, I'll do staggered bell times so that there's limited number of kids in the hallway. The hall direction will be one direction throughout the day. So there's lots of little factors we have to take into consideration. But a lot of it on how the day is going to be structured and what that's going to look like, we have to also consider the other two buildings and transportation. And there's some families have multiple kids in different buildings, and how are we going to coordinate with the other buildings? The hard part though is the high school's structure and schedule is different than a K-8 because they've got a set schedule they run through every single day, and they're looking at credits for graduation. So we need to make sure that they stay on track for graduation and we're getting them everything that they need. And, we could also add another layer on what state testing going to look like next year. Are we going to have state testing? There's so many different parameters that go into it. And so to avoid myself from losing my mind, I just want to focus on what are our options on how we can make school run and work successfully while still meeting all the regulations and guidelines by CDC, the governor, the health department, ODE. I think kids need to be here. They need to socialize. Will it happen every day? Probably not. I foresee it more happening once or twice a week, and then the rest of the time they'll be learning online. But I think it'll be more structured. I think it'll be a better schedule. Grading will look different. So I foresee it, and again, this isn't set in stone, but I do foresee something along the lines of not having an open-ended deadline for late assignments. I think it's reasonable that we can now go back to, they have a deadline to get assignments done. We finished off this year where the kids could do missing work indefinitely just to get it done. But next year there will be, stricter guidelines when it comes to when assignments need to be done and expectations, because we've got to get back on a schedule. We've got to do something that's more realistic, because in the long run too, we're also trying to get the kids ready for the real world, and in life there's deadlines. And so we've got to get back to that expectation of, you've got 1 or 2 weeks to get this assignment in. If it's not in, then there's consequences. Kind of like our taxes. We have to pay our taxes, and we've got a deadline to pay our taxes. And there's a consequence if we don't pay our taxes on time. So I just think it's a life lesson, and it's something we need to teach our kids, that there's deadlines that you need to meet, and that's just life. So I do believe next year will be more structured, and it'll be better organized than how it ended up this year. Not saying it was negative, but again, we were thrown into it with very little prep time. Yeah. But we'll have the summer to prep and prepare on how we want it to look.
Well, you've talked about the guidelines that from all those different organizations, CDC and so on. And you already talked about a little bit about how you've interacted with other teachers within other schools and so on. If you could expound on that and how you have worked with the other teachers and principals and so on with the different schools in Lorain County.
Well, we've talked a lot about at the beginning how other schools were going to finish off the third quarter grades, how they were going to do semester grades. It was pretty much common that I don't think any school did semester exams. I think we differed a lot on how we are doing final grades, but we always had that open conversation on what it was going to look like to kind of stay a little consistent, or at least be aware of what the other schools were doing. We have not had the conversation yet on how other schools are looking at opening next year, but I think it's because there are so many unknowns, and I think, at least from my perspective, I want to get this year done before really diving in deep on what next year is going to look like, because this has been a very hard, stressful end of the year for everybody, and we need to finalize it. All of our teachers are going to be trained at the end of in June, beginning of June, for some online learning and online instruction. So that's going to be very beneficial for everybody. But we really, and even I'm on a committee for the state and talking to the other principals that are on my state committee. I think everybody's waiting just to finish off the year. And there are so many unknowns for next year. We're all frustrated because we don't know which direction to go.
Yeah, absolutely. I can feel the frustration in your voice, and I certainly understand the position that you're in. Well, finally, this past weekend, all 50 states reopened in one form or another. And we noticed, I think as of this morning, I think something like 17 states have got an unchecked rise in cases of the coronavirus. From a professional point of view, and if you'd like to share a personal point of view, specifically having to do with the reopening and how it's actually going to affect, or how will it affect possibly how the school year next year is taken care of?
Well, professionally, I have to do what I'm told to do, and I have to make sure that we're following all the regulations that we're given. And that's a safety precaution for our kids and for our families and for my staff. And I will do whatever I'm told to do from a professional standpoint, because that's just my job. My job is to keep everybody safe and to make sure we're following the rules and the expectations.
Right.
From a personal standpoint, I'm ready. I'm ready to get back. I personally don't think opening everything back up on a holiday weekend was necessarily the right call. But that was the call they made. But personally, I'm ready to get my life back. And I say that as a person who's highly at risk, because I have a lot of illnesses, and I've got a lot of pre-existing conditions that make me very susceptible to illnesses and COVID. But I'm just really tired of not being able to do things that I want to do. And so I'm ready to just get out and start living my life again. I understand the risks, and I understand the fear that people have. And I'm not saying I'm not scared, but I'm just ready to get back to living my life again. Because, the weather's nice and I enjoy getting out and doing stuff, and I enjoy going places, and I just feel like I'm a prisoner in my home, and I just don't like that feeling.
Well, I can certainly understand that because we're all in a shelter at home in one respect or another. Well, we'd like to thank Mrs. Tina Drake very much for giving us an insight from her point of view as to what's been going on before March 13th, after March 13th, and what to look forward to, even though we don't necessarily know what to look forward to come this fall for the 2020-2021 school year. So once again, Mrs. Drake, thank you very much for giving us that insight. We will look at a summary of all of the Dialogue with the Dukes during this school year once this particular program has been put in place. So this, as I said, is the Dialogue with the Dukes for the 2019-2020 school year. This has been Dialogue with the Dukes. As we always do at the end of every school year, we always provide a summary for what has actually happened during the school year with Dialogue with the Dukes. And I'm going to have to get my glasses on here. You'll understand when you get to be my age. Last year, during the 2018-2019 school year, we actually had 31 episodes, but because of the coronavirus, we only had 21 episodes for the school year, the 2019-2020 school year this year. And including in that, we had 3 COVID-19 home editions that we did at the very end of the school year. Breaking it all down, we had 19 athletes were interviewed and 3 coaches. And we covered the following sports. We covered cross country, golf, football, volleyball, boys and girls soccer. And by the way, the girls soccer team won the inaugural girls soccer championship in the Lorain County League. So they actually went undefeated in the conference. So congratulations once again to the girls soccer team this past year. We also covered bowling, wrestling, boys basketball, and the final episode as far as athletics were concerned, which has yet to see the light of day, and we'll have to talk to Mr. Conklin about that. We interviewed 2 athletes and 1 coach for the athletic leadership group. We also had one interview with a 4-sport athlete. Specifically for her, Grace Dudziak is involved in 4 sports. She's involved with soccer, basketball, track, and football. We also continued our series depicting on how well the school district and the community, graduates from Wellington High School, actually produce successful American citizens. We had an aspiring actor. We had a gentleman who initially was in the Air Force and now works for American Eagle as an avionics professional. Excuse me. We also had a landscaper and a roofing contractor and a salesman. We also interviewed the new school psychologist. We also interviewed 3 teachers during the year. We also had a special program in which we talked about It's a Wonderful Life, a live radio show in which we introduced the 3 students that were performing the sound effects for the radio show, and also interviewed Dottie Cianciola, the director of the Patricia Lindley Center for the Performing Arts. We also had that special Christmas special, as we always have every year, with the Wellington High School Choir, in which we had selections of Christmas songs performed by the choir at Christmas time. And finally, as we said, we had the home edition. We had for the COVID-19, we had the 3 students, the 3 officers from the drama club. We interviewed a retail person in a grocery store there in Wellington, the Oberlin Market. And then you saw this one where we interviewed Mrs. Tina Drake, the principal of Wellington High School, and what actually happened during the school year this past year. So we hope that you have been educated. We hope that you enjoyed all of the segments that were produced by Mr. Conklin and his digital media class. And I want to specifically thank all of the students in that digital media classroom, Mr. Conklin, and also Mr. John Bowman, the athletic director of Wellington High School. We will be back again next year for Dialogue with the Dukes, and we will see what happens. We have been looking at the possibility of having a special COVID-19 summer edition of Dialogue with the Dukes, so we'll see how that works out. But in the meantime, this has been Dialogue with the Dukes.